While I'm not someone who has a particular interest in the Isekai genre, there is no avoiding of its tenacity that is still looming within Japanese media. What was once just a setting has now been spun into a subgenre of its own, a trend that amateur novelists can capitalize, which means there are always Isekai content being made, adapted, and delivered. Hey, I don't blame them, the concept sure is enticing, and it seems to be resonating with a generation that has grown up along with video games and the fantasies they entail, hence the popularity of the genre. Some may say it has been overdone, but I do believe there will always be breathing spaces for creativity to thrive. Though some titles felt like they have done lesser by presenting little variances within a more established framework, the fact that they are still injecting their own interpretations on certain systems and rules are still commendable, and oftentimes make for some momentary fun. It is just not something I would seek for actively. I have no qualms with the usual transporting to an unfamiliar world stories that are generally categorized as fantasy. But specifically with the Isekai as we now recognize since the boom of certain shows, and probably due to the nature of the bubble where these web novels came from. The tropes they exhibit are not diverse enough to encourage a constant catch-up with the genre. So it was once in a blue moon, I felt like taking on another Isekai show. Through browsing my backlog, Overlord beckons. I've heard of the show beforehand and got the idea it was fairly popular, even revered among the bunch within the genre. My friends seemed to enjoy it through some casual conversations we had, so I thought what could go wrong? Worst case scenario, I'll only experience a mediocre show. Suffice to say, I've had some pretty standard expectations before binging the show due to the general reception. But only halfway through the first season, I was actually surprised by how disappointed I felt. The entire show is hollow as a skull. Overlord begins right before the server closure of an MMO, Yggdrasil, in which our protagonist, Momonga, decided to log in to spend a final moment in the game as the guild leader, reminiscing the journey he shared with the retired players under the same flag. But to his surprise, the game didn't shut down when it hits the clock. Instead, he finds himself stuck in the game. A while later, we found out he does not reside within Yggdrasil anymore but a foreign land, and all the NPCs have become sentient somehow. As a being with much power in his hands and the disinterest on escaping, Momonga's goal now is to learn about the new world while trying to carve a place for himself by spreading his influence. To conquer the world using the name of his guild, Ainz, as he puts it. A logical defense mechanism act with a dash of ambition, if you will. We all know the protagonists of isekai shows more often than not fall into two polar opposite cliches. They either be a baby character at the lowest rank of the power spectrum and start surviving moving upwards, or they are just overpowered super being, juggling their powers along right from the start. As a veteran of the game, Momonga is the latter, having absolute power and the strongest tools imaginable under his sleeves. Based on his reminiscing of how the guild was formed and the description of the unique guild item, it is safe to assume he is one of the top players in a top guild at that, the elite of the elites. With a bunch of faithful and powerful servants at disposal and godly capabilities, taking over the world seems like a very possible goal to achieve. However, the scope of which the show explores is far minuscule than the promised potential. Rather, the methods Momonga came up throughout the entire show are not particularly efficient towards realizing his goal, and even contradictory in nature at times. Early in the show, we were told that Momonga plans to expand his influence using the name of the guild, in hopes of other Yggdrasil players may recognize the name and come in contact with him. But when he learns about the fact that Yggdrasil currency is not being used in this world, he decided to not trade with the Yggdrasil money to avoid blowing up his cover to any unknown parties. Now, let's assume this is Momonga himself practicing cautions, that he only wants to spread his name by mouth alone and not items because somehow that is more controllable. This still goes against his very initial interest, that is, trying to locate other Yggdrasil players. Upon thinking to myself after finishing the season, I question what's the harm of leaking some Yggdrasil bugs out there. Instead of modifying a plan to best fit his circumstances, he abandons it altogether. At least leave a tiny amount of the currency behind some unpopulated villages as breadcrumbs and anticipate their discovery. Even though the chances are slim, it is still a low-key way around on what he is trying to achieve, isn't it? If he is capable of such cautious practices, then what he is about to do in the later half of the show further contradicts with his personality. On episode 5 onwards, Momonga would disguise himself as an active adventurer in a town, trying to climb his rank from copper up to the highest possible tier. The priority of this farce is to achieve higher social standing among the adventurers, as more information of the world will be easier to attain at higher position. As you might have guessed, there's no way he's going to grind himself up with honesty. He's going to take the shortcut by solving impossible tasks that will skyrocket his fame in no time. But isn't that too extravagant an action to take based on his previous high alert standard? In episode 9, he would jump from copper rank to mithril overnight from just one quest. Because of that, the rumor of his heroic feats has rung all over town, as stated by Momonga himself. Going out in such high profile, isn't that just painting a bright red target on his own back? This is unlike his achievement at the end of the season where he reaches the highest adamantite rank. To justify this achievement, it would mean that hiding is no longer Momonga's intention. He should be confident and prepared enough to face higher risks head on, taking the initiative and be the active player to get the gears turning, which is exactly what the entire ending montage implied, so I approve the consistency there. But leaping from copper to mithril overnight in the middle of an undercover mission, he is just inviting people to investigate his background. Not to mention wearing an outlandish, what looks like a rare set of armor out in the day with a red cape, absorbing all the possible attention at all times. I think the culprit of these inconsistencies stem from the lack of any solid characterization of Momonga himself. Because we, the audience, didn't get to know a whole lot about Momonga's personality, it is hard for us to go into his headspace and predict along what sort of actions he would take, creating dissonances that question his way of works. Through some monologue, we learned that he is a 9-to-5 white collar in his previous life. We learned that he is perverted enough to alter the setting of a sexy servant just so that she will love him unconditionally. He likes role-playing and speaks in a high and mighty manner sometimes to exert dominance, and would also casually spout some nonsense about owning the entire world just to sound cool in front of his servants, which later on causes quite some misunderstandings among the Guardians. So based on these actions, I think he's not someone who is taking the current situation particularly seriously. Yet when something unexpected happens that hinders his plan, he would throw a little tantrum to the point where it reaches some system's threshold, which forces a calm down function on him. I take then he is someone with anger management issue. And based on his problem-solving capabilities, his level of wit is not outstanding either. It was all very murky. Now, I'm well aware this is how the main characters in isekai stories are written in most of the cases, but even if they ended up more or less a Mary Sue, they oftentimes have at least one trait that sticks out for the audience to grasp the baseline on what kind of person they are. All Momonga has is the cumulative power from his guild that he has earned solely by churning in more playtime in Yggdrasil. That's about how I frame this character by the end of the show. Lack of any solid characterization on the main guy makes Overlord pale among other isekai stories that capitalize the traits of their protagonists to create interesting scenarios which they will then put upon and produce satisfying outcomes. One such contrary of Momonga is Shiroe from Log Horizon. While it may be a little unfair to bring up a comparison at this point, Log Horizon was actually the one of a few isekai shows that I had actually consumed, and the one I had the fondest of memories. And of course, there are close parallels to be drawn between them, hence the comparison. Just like in Overlord, the mystery of entrapment in the game is banished away immediately. The characters of both shows quickly come to terms with the fact that they are stuck there, and escaping is never a priority for both. And just like in Overlord, the story explores the intricacies of the world's systems and create narratives using the vast yet limited tools offered by the game. Oh, and both shows featured a magic caster as protagonist, and their ambitions are equally large in scope to each of their own ways. Shiroe is a character who his strongest of weapons is his own intelligence, instead of any tools offered in the game. He is the strategist of a legendary party known worldwide in Eldertale, a man capable of assessing combat situations in a multi-layered level, has a deep understanding on the rules and systems of the entire game, and most importantly, his prudence goes beyond the game. In short, he is a smart guy all around and not just a gamer. And it is through his lens we experience the show knowing he is going to overcome problems with his clever plannings, gaming the system, negotiating and persuading, giving orders and even manipulating others. In terms of combat prowess, he depends on his party members to do the heavy lifting, overseeing and command. And the side joke about him making his teammates do the bidding, serving as the extended arms of his evil mastermind, is a tad of extra humor that has made a good contrast with his humble attitude. Because Log Horizon is so forefront about Shiroe's strengths, the show is able to relay its point across more clearly through his motivation and the cases he faced in the game. Log Horizon taps into how humans adapt themselves in a digital world, and Shiroe's interest is to maintain harmony of the entire community, NPCs and players alike. With that in mind, interesting scenarios are crafted circling around this idea and applied onto Shiroe. There's this discovery in the show where everyone realizes they can experience the sense of taste again if the food is prepared by actual cooking process instead of using the in-game crafting function. This immediately improves everyone's morale and quality of life in the game. The joy of relishing a meal, what used to be a day-to-day activity that were taken granted in real life, has now retained by the players, not to mention the potential economic growth that follows, now that cooking is a profitable profession thanks to the discovery. Just this achievement alone gave off a sense that everyone can still progress collectively as human race in this digital world they used to interact offhand. And it is all thanks to Shiroe. Not only he took the advantages of that discovery and executed a plan from the very ground level, he even maximizes the utility of it and forced everyone with influence to submit under his masterful plan. Inventions and basic laws emerged and the cogwheels of life started to turn, tying their original lifestyle closer to the new environment they are forced into. Meanwhile, our Lord Momonga is an undead who has no basic human needs. Despite having more time in hand without having to deal with hunger and stamina, he is not making any meaningful progress upon realizing his only goal. Again, with no clear characterization, we couldn't expect Momonga's actions and how they contribute towards his cause. While being open-ended may give more chances for the writer to divert expectations, it is also risky for the show to just wander aimlessly, which unfortunately is exactly what happened. The plot of the entire show is mostly Momonga reacting upon situations conveniently thrown in front of his way, being the passive party instead of taking initiatives himself. Since we know he's not one that excels in the brain department, his actions are usually counterproductive and lack any flares of excitement. In one case, when his subordinate pointed out a better solution around the situation, he is dumbfounded by his own inability, as if the show itself is self-aware about their main boy being inadequate on problem solving.
隠密能力に長けたしもべを送り込み、大きな変化が生じるまで高みの見物をされていた方が最高のタイミングをつかめたのではないでしょうか。
There are, however, a few paths of development I could see being explored, wherein Momonga could slightly redeem himself as a better character, based on whatever limited hints given in this season for me to speculate the narrative directions the author wants to approach. Back to when Momonga overwrites the personality trait of Albedo, what struck me as a little odd is that he did not pull the same trick on the other servants, not once after Albedo. I take this as a hint that he may be regretting over the alteration he committed jokingly, that he had unintentionally tainted a being in this world he loves with his self-interest and foolishness. The show has established that these servants are creations of his guildmates, and since all his guildmates have a certain spot within his heart, it is only courteous for Momonga to show respect towards these creatures in commemorate of their existence. And he actually did that throughout the show. He rides the high horse in front of them out of necessity to establish dominance, but he had never treated them purely as dispensable tools. So in the case of Albedo, perhaps the irreversible change Momonga forced into her code was something shameful he do not want to repeat again. Yes, I'm suggesting that this waifu of yours was a mistake. This relationship with his subordinates and the meeting scenes between the creatures that suggest they are growing more sentient than what Momonga has predicted kind of gave me some hopes that they might play into improving his character in future events. Could it be later when these creatures starting to act on their own beliefs to defy him, and that forces Momonga to face the outcomes of his irresponsibility as an incompetent leader? Or it can go the other way around, like having Momonga to swallow his pride and finally accept his own shortcomings, allowing the creatures to have more influence over his operations, embracing the individuality of all his servants and let them fill the spaces he personally lacks, not just respect them as intelligent beings but take them in as brethren. Could the bad taste of a joke, that is mind manipulating a woman to love you unconditionally, actually a foreshadow to a disaster yet to come? Apparently, there are 2 more seasons for me to find out whether these may come true or not. The poor pacing of the show is not helping, nor they are ignorable either. It would span a few episodes to resolve one single problem they encounter, only to get a conclusion that doesn't contribute to the bigger question they sought for at the beginning. All they learn are some miscellaneous facts about the world, which could have been done through some experiment behind the curtain if they want, while the conquering of the land was left with little to no progression. It is only by the end of the season we get a glimpse that Momonga is starting some sort of movement, but by this point it took 13 episodes to get things rolling. The crucial achievements he had done in this season were influence a small village, getting his adventure ranked up to the highest, learn about the existence of someone who possessed a world item from Yggdrasil, and that's all. And one of these events is a freebie from some unknown entity. To examine further on just how little has happened given the 13 episodes airtime, here are some cut-out examples. Almost half of episode 5 took place in what seems to be a guild lounge, and the exposition here is relentless. This episode is when Momonga becomes an adventurer as we have discussed, and on around the 12-minute mark onwards, he tries to pick a quest, fail because he couldn't read the language, and a team of ordinary adventurers hire him along for one. They then sit around a huge table within the lounge and had a fairly lengthy discussion about the job. Momonga gets to extract some knowledge about the world he has yet to know between the conversations. Cool. And just when they are about to leave and start working, a guy came into the lounge and offers a job directed specifically to Momonga. Though Momonga did try to decline the offer in an attempt to show off good etiquette, he still wants to listen about the request. But guess where they are taking the conversation to? Back to the table we go. Lengthy exposition aside, it baffles me they would want the viewers to stuck along in this dull-looking lounge for 8 whole minutes. They could have made up an excuse for the conversation to happen elsewhere, maybe to the potion shop where the employer came from. Perhaps not the best idea, since it is unsure whether Momonga would take the request or not, and I would imagine paperwork can be done immediately within the lounge for the conveniency of the employer if they have struck the deal. So let's keep the range in-house. What about somewhere more private than an open area, since the employer himself is about to brief his own request? You know, to prevent potential eavesdropping? It is a fetch quest after all. Just like give us a room, a different environment. I know background art is part of the production, but they really skimp on this one, it seems. Momonga also spent a full 7 minutes of the entire episode 11 in a secret warehouse, explaining his plan of confronting Shalltear in front of Albedo, during which the show only cuts away once for a flashback and no more. Meanwhile, in Log Horizon, Shiroe travels out his main turf and saves someone from another town, gone through a partial character arc himself, and created his own guild on episode 6, successfully formed the Round Table Alliance, established basic laws, and gets the economy running by the end of episode 10, while entering the second arc where they try to build a relationship with the NPCs by visiting the nobles on episode 11. All that before halfway through the entire first season. Comparison ends here. Perhaps this has something to do with the source material and the adaptation process. How much material was planned to brought over from the light novel to the screen, and how they fit in a season. I have not the clue, and perhaps you can tell me about it. But if the anime was supposed to draw attention to the light novel, I know they have lost me as a potential reader. It's not like there isn't anything interesting going on, but the focus of the show, or rather the opening arc, happens to fall off the radar from the stuffs I find intriguing. The interactions between the guardians behind Momonga's watch are much more interesting than anything he attempts to do. It is fascinating to witness the little peeks into the creatures' minds through the conversations between them, knowing they had only grown sentient recently from the game's lockdown. It doesn't seem like they would rebel against Momonga because they have shown genuine loyalty, but it is exactly this impenetrable devotion that I wish the show would explore this subplot more. What sort of actions they would take for the sake of themselves despite having absolute loyalty carved into their minds. What are their ideals? It will be an interesting twist if they are able to gradually influence Momonga's way of thinking as the show progresses, either convincingly or cajoling to gain favors. That will be a perspective I can find myself digging, but despite the show spending quite some time for their introductory in episode 2, they barely get any screen time after that. Halfway into the season, I thought if the plot of the show is lacking, maybe I should look into other aspects to further comprehend what had exactly made the show stood out among the rest. Being a pretty show could help. It is a visual medium after all. Jumping into an isekai and having a unique, beautiful world with imaginative world building would certainly enhance the experience to a certain degree despite other shortcomings. But sadly, the show didn't even deliver in the visual department. Bad, generic background art plagues the entire course of the show. No glimpse of the world can be seen or experienced with our own eyes. If you have watched the show, I want you to try and recall one location where you can still point out some visual details about the world right now. If you can come up with one, it is probably somewhere in the Nazarick base, which you probably couldn't map out the basic structure because they never bothered to explore the place despite giving it a name. I suppose it is a base made out of several dimensions, since the job of the Guardians seems to be the protectors of the floors they were assigned to. Nevertheless, my point is that how the show presents the world is extremely unmemorable. Nowhere in the entire show looks intriguing on any degree. Not the base, not Karn Village, not the inn, the guild lounge, the potion shop, the town, the restaurant, the graveyard, the forest, and not even the area where the climax takes place. They are so featureless to the point where saying they look generic is too generous of an assessment. At this moment of writing the script, an image from yet another isekai show I enjoyed flashes in my mind, and this image alone tells you more about their world more than anything Overlord ever could to its own. It is the simple bird's eye view of the beginner's town in Konosuba, featured in the very beginning of the show's first opening. You don't need much to persuade the audience there's at least a basic realized world pillars behind the scenes. If they are not using any long-winded history or the lore to deliver, just a little visual stimulation can set up the initial spark and let us go wild in our imagination. That will be enough to sell us a believable world, which in my humble opinion is what this image is attempting to do, albeit generic. We see a civilization build an entire town around a river, taking geographical advantage. Walls built around signals there's a need to set up defensive measures. Nothing too fancy, but it paints a solid enough impression in our minds. To think that a 1-second shot from an opening, which most people probably skips past, is able to exert more world-building substance than an entire season of a show, it baffles me to no end. Consider the first time we saw a wide pan shot of a city happens at the very last episode. It is safe to assume that Overlord had never put any considerations into making its world enticing at all. And this is supposed to be a genre where the word world is literally in the term itself. The background art treatment given to Overlord couldn't be described any better than the standard of bare minimum. And don't get me started with the animation quality. There's barely anything that catches my attention or left an impression. Not even the effects animations are up to par, which I deem important in a show where casting magic takes up the entire portion of any combat. There were only 2 effects I found they had made it justice. This black hole vacuum effect and this reality slice effect. The others are really mediocre. I suppose the serviceable climax of the season is worth mentioning to neutralize the harsh treatment I've been giving to the show. The final battle between Shalltear and Momonga showcased the limitations of a predetermined AI character against the multitudinal human minds, as the title of the episode spells. Unlike any other fights so far, which were all one-sided glorified domination by Momonga, Shalltear at least puts up a good fight and forced him to settle it with item management and some tricky mind games like acting, elements outside of sheer power. Though achieving victory by using a bunch of cash items might come out as cheap tactic, I kind of give it a blind eye because it is not unreasonable. With all the assets of the strongest guild left behind for Momonga alone, it is at least palpable for him to have these cards under his sleeves. The purpose of this fight, other than saving Shalltear and conveniently give himself another chance to rise in the adventurer rank again, is that for Momonga to set an example in front of the other guardians, making a point on how strongly he can adapt with situations, despite facing an unfavorable fight, so that if anyone is planning on a coup, they might have to scratch that idea. Being hands-on saving a comrade also paints himself as a caring leader who is willing to take his subordinates' feelings into heart, making him a more worthy figure among his troops. Though the show didn't really spells out the purpose of the fight in such a way, I would like to believe this is another underlying implication, because God knows I'm desperately trying to make the show more interesting for myself. And there you have it, the most engaging sequence of the entire season. Overlord has nothing outstanding to offer despite its well-received remarks around the general anime community. From a lot of angles where Isekai could strive, it fell short in every way possible. If I am to give it a final pat on the back, at least it has both amazing opening and ending songs. After finishing the season, I am reluctant on whether to continue watching the following season, though as someone who has a viewing habit to always commit finishing a series once I started it, I would probably find myself catching up the second season in the future, in hope it will redeem itself at least a little. The cliffhanger at the end here seems promising, but I really shouldn't set up any expectations anymore, no matter how low said expectation may be. Whatever the case, if there are any more bad or good things to say after I have consumed the following seasons, you will hear from me with another video. At this point, it will need a huge overhaul to penetrate my cynical perspective going forward. Perhaps you are underestimating the shock I had, realizing how unenjoyable the show was for me. But I will have you know, at some point, I have jokingly told my friends I might have enjoyed Sword Art Online more than Overlord, while part of me inside acknowledged there's a grain of truth in that joke. This one is one of my worst anime viewing experience in ages. It is that bad in my eyes. But please don't find my stand on the show as an offense to your taste if you have enjoyed Overlord. If anything, I would like to hear some positive statements regarding to the show from those who have truly enjoyed it. Or if you are a fan of the light novel, let me know what do you think about the anime adaptation. Tell me all about it in the comments down below. Any perspectives are welcomed, and I'm looking forward to hear something genuinely positive to cure this bitterness I've tasted. This is one of many videos I've spent almost a year to prepare, an attempt to kickstart my channel, Moon Anime. And I promise the majority of them coming your way are positive ones. They will be uploaded weekly, so subscribe to my channel if you want to keep up with my content. This channel is a huge endeavor of mine at this point of life, so it will mean a lot to me if you have watched this far and decided to help me along. Follow me on Twitter at moonanime9 for some occasional anime-related tweeting, and feel free to check out my other videos if you have the time. Million thanks for watching this far, and I will see you from the moon. 次回 on Moon Anime。
歌はもちろんデビュー曲。私の彼はパイロットです。どうぞ。